The lights of Hollywood dazzle like a constellation, promising fame, wealth, and immortality. But behind the curtain lies a darker truth, an unforgiving industry that worships youth and swiftly punishes those who defy time. Demi Moore knew this world intimately. Once one of its brightest stars, she now stood at the edge of a harsh reality few dared to speak aloud. Her story begins not in decline but in defiance, of aging, of bias, of silence. Before we dive deeper into this powerful journey of resilience and transformation, don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more real stories that inspire and challenge the norm. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Demi Moore wasn't just another actress, she was a force. In the 1990s, she ruled the box office with a magnetism that made her both respected and feared. Films like Ghost, Indecent Proposal, and G.I. Jane weren't just hits, they redefined genres. She earned millions per film, broke gender pay gaps, and proved that a woman could lead without needing a male co-star to validate her power. But her ascent wasn't easy. Born in Roswell, New Mexico, Moore's childhood was turbulent. Her parents battled addiction and stability was rare. She dropped out of high school at 16 and entered the world of modeling and acting with little more than ambition and grit. Her early years were shaped by survival instincts, qualities that would later fuel her performances with raw authenticity. She didn't walk into Hollywood, she stormed it. What set Demi apart wasn't just her beauty or talent, it was her courage. She shaved her head for G.I. Jane, trained for months like a soldier, and took roles that demanded more than just emotion. They required transformation. She wasn't afraid to be tough, vulnerable, or controversial. In an era when female leads were often ornamental, Moore was commanding. Yet even for someone as powerful as her, time would become a silent adversary. In her late 30s, whispers began to circulate. Journalists no longer asked about her upcoming roles. They asked about her skincare, her relationships, her age. The same media that once praised her strength began dissecting her appearance, comparing her to younger actresses, hinting she had peaked. She hadn't aged out of talent, she had simply aged, and in Hollywood, that was enough. The transition was subtle at first, fewer offers, less screen time, and increasingly roles that felt like a step backward. Strong central characters were replaced with motherly cameos, or love interests written without depth. Moore, who once embodied independence and intensity, was being quietly repositioned. Behind the glamour, Demi felt it, like an invisible hand pushing her out of the frame. She tried to adapt. She invested in production, attended auditions, even explored different genres. But the doors that once opened easily now creaked with resistance. Her name, once synonymous with strength, was now a risk on casting sheets. The pressure was relentless. Hollywood didn't just turn its back, it questioned her worth. And for the first time in years, Demi Moore stood alone, not as a fallen star, but as a woman forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. In an industry obsessed with youth, even legends weren't safe. Yet, in the silence that followed, something stirred. This wasn't the end of her story, it was the start of a reckoning. As Demi Moore moved deeper into her 40s, something unsettling began to happen. The phone didn't ring as often. Scripts stopped arriving in thick bundles. When offers did come, they were unrecognizable, supporting roles, forgettable characters, often centered on how gracefully she could age on screen. Hollywood had begun its quiet retreat, not because of a scandal or failure, but because time had passed. Once the highest-paid actress in the world, Moore now faced a stark contrast. She still possessed the same intensity, the same fire, but the industry no longer looked at her the same way. The questions in interviews subtly shifted, less about artistry, more about appearance. The underlying message was clear. How well are you maintaining yourself, and for how long can you remain watchable? The media, always hungry for spectacle, didn't help. Tabloids dissected her public appearances with clinical precision, comparing before and after photos, speculating about cosmetic procedures, and drawing attention to every wrinkle, every change in body shape. It wasn't just criticism, it was dehumanization. Headlines reduced her to a cautionary tale. Once a goddess, now a mystery, one read. Demi fights time, another proclaimed. Rather than focusing on her decades-long contribution to film, the conversation turned toward age and image. And in Hollywood, image is everything. What made it worse was watching her male contemporaries continue to thrive. Actors she had starred alongside were now being cast in blockbuster roles, often opposite women half their age. They were seen as distinguished, refined. She, on the other hand, was considered outdated. Moore wasn't losing her talent. She was losing the right to display it. Behind the camera, the emotional toll grew heavier. Demi had always been confident, tough, and determined. But now doubt crept in. Was she still relevant? Was she still wanted? She wrestled with questions that were never asked of her male peers, and perhaps more painfully, she faced moments where she began to believe the narrative being written about her. In private, friends noticed the change. Her once assertive tone had softened, her once public presence had grown quieter. She began turning down public appearances, hesitant to give the media more fuel. The woman who once defied the odds and shattered box office records now found herself shrinking into the background of an industry that had once begged for her attention. And yet, even in this storm of rejection, there was a flicker of resistance. Demi wasn't content to fade away. She was beginning to understand that the enemy wasn't just age, it was perception. The battle wasn't about turning back time, but about redefining what power looked like in a woman over 40. Still, it wasn't easy. Every attempt to reclaim her position came with criticism. A new role sparked gossip. A red carpet look led to ridicule. The cost of persistence was steep, and the rewards uncertain. But Moore, forged in hardship from a young age, wasn't ready to surrender. She may have been bruised, but she wasn't broken. As whispers of her irrelevance grew louder, Demi stood quietly in the eye of the storm, waiting, watching, and gathering strength. Somewhere deep within, she knew her story wasn't finished. The world might have started to forget her, but she had not forgotten who she was. And neither had someone else, someone whose presence would soon make all the difference. In the midst of uncertainty and waning confidence, an unexpected voice rose to support Demi Moore, not from the media, not from the industry, but from someone who had shared both her triumphs and her struggles. Bruce Willis, her ex-husband and longtime friend, emerged as a steady force. Their marriage had ended years earlier, but the connection they shared went far beyond romance. It was built on mutual respect, shared history, and the love they held for their children. Bruce had always known who Demi truly was. He'd seen her brilliance long before the world labeled it, and now, as the world questioned her relevance, he chose not to stay silent. In interviews, when asked about aging in Hollywood, Bruce redirected the conversation. He spoke of Demi, her strength, her resilience, her artistry, not as an ex-wife, but as a peer who had witnessed her evolve through decades. He called out the double standards, openly criticizing the way the industry celebrated aging in men while punishing it in women. His words weren't vague gestures. They were deliberate, pointed, and courageous in a business where speaking out could close doors. But Bruce wasn't chasing roles. He was defending truth. This act of public solidarity did more than offer emotional support. It shifted the narrative. Moore wasn't alone anymore. Someone the industry still admired was standing beside her. The impact was immediate. Conversations around her name changed. The same outlets that had once mocked her started re-examining their coverage. Directors, once hesitant, began to revisit old projects she had been overlooked for. Bruce didn't just lend his voice, he used his network. Quietly behind the scenes, he made calls. He connected Moore with filmmakers who respected her craft. He invited her to participate in private readings, charity events, and even collaborative discussions around new scripts. These weren't handouts. They were reminders of her place at the table. And Moore, though initially hesitant, began to respond. The encouragement ignited something dormant. For years she had been fighting alone. Now, supported by someone who truly believed in her, she could breathe again. She started saying yes again, yes to meetings, yes to projects, yes to taking up space, unapologetically. Bruce's presence was a mirror, reflecting back everything she had tried to suppress, her worth, her voice, her brilliance. With every conversation, she began to believe in herself again. Their renewed bond became a model of something rare in Hollywood: genuine friendship between former partners. There were no headlines of scandal, no dramatic reconciliations, just two people who had shared a life, raising daughters together, now choosing to uplift each other without condition. Inspired by his support, Moore decided to pivot. If Hollywood wouldn't offer the roles she deserved, she would create them. She began reading scripts not just as an actress, but as a producer. She collaborated with indie filmmakers, lent her experience to emerging voices, and quietly mentored young women entering the industry with the same fire she once had. The media, slow to admit its missteps, started to shift. Articles began framing Moore as resilient, timeless, and empowered. But for Demi, it wasn't about reclaiming headlines, it was about reclaiming herself. What Bruce had offered wasn't just validation, it was partnership. In an industry built on image, he had chosen substance. And in doing so, he reminded Demi that her story didn't have to end the way others expected. She was writing a new chapter, one she would own completely. The comeback wasn't announced with fanfare or flashy premieres. It happened quietly, intentionally, and on Demi Moore's own terms. She began choosing scripts not based on trend or commercial value, but on substance. Independent dramas, character-driven stories, raw narratives, these were the spaces where Moore could shine again. And she did. Critics began to take notice. Her performances were layered and powerful, filled with a depth that only life experience could provide. Audiences who had grown up watching her now saw her in a new light, not as a nostalgia act, but as a woman with renewed purpose and emotional gravity. Moore was not chasing youth, she was embracing her truth. One role in particular, a grieving mother in a low-budget psychological thriller, earned her quiet acclaim. It didn't dominate the box office, but it won her something more valuable: respect. Reviewers described her as mesmerizing, soulful, and fearlessly vulnerable. There was no glamour in the performance, no artifice, just raw human pain and resilience. For the first time in years, Moore felt seen for who she was, not who she had been. And her resurgence wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. It challenged an industry norm that had gone unquestioned for too long. The idea that women over 40 couldn't lead films, couldn't carry emotional weight, couldn't be complex and magnetic was now being directly confronted by Moore's work. The conversations expanded. Panels and podcasts began discussing the imbalance in casting. Social media threads dissected the hypocrisy. While male actors aged into gravitas, women were often discarded or rebranded as accessories. Demi's resurgence became a case study, a rallying point for broader change. What once seemed like career twilight became a movement. Moore didn't claim this mantle alone. She collaborated with other actresses who had faced similar challenges. Women like Julianne Moore, Viola Davis, and Nicole Kidman, each with their own battles against the industry's subtle ageism. Together, they supported female-led projects, funded stories that centered on women's experiences, and publicly advocated for inclusive casting. Demi also became more vocal in interviews. She spoke with clarity and conviction about the absurdity of Hollywood's obsession with youth, about how aging wasn't a flaw, but a privilege. She emphasized that depth, experience, and emotion don't fade, they evolve. Her words resonated far beyond the industry, reaching women across the globe who had been told their value diminished with time. She addressed award shows not with bitterness but with truth. At one film festival, she stood on stage and said, "Aging is not the enemy of relevance, it's the foundation of wisdom." The room erupted, not out of politeness, but because it was a truth too long ignored. Backed by talent and bolstered by purpose, Moore became not just an actress again, but an advocate. Her story wasn't just about survival, it was about transformation. Hollywood, resistant as it was, couldn't ignore her forever. More offers came, better roles, collaborative projects. She wasn't playing someone's mother as a side character, she was the lead again. And this time she had the power to say no, to set terms, to define the lens through which her story was told. What began as a return turned into a redefinition. Demi Moore didn't just reclaim her place, she reshaped the space around her, and in doing so, She proved that the real strength of a woman is not how well she preserves the past, but how fiercely she moves forward. In the quiet aftermath of a storm, there is often a moment of clarity. For Demi Moore, that moment came not with an award or a headline, but with peace, the kind that settles when you no longer seek permission to exist. She had spent years in battle, against the media, against expectations, against the silent erasure that so many women face once they cross an invisible threshold of age. But now, with each role she chose, each boundary she redefined, Demi was no longer reacting, she was leading. Her fans, both old and new, saw it. They saw a woman who had endured pain without losing tenderness, who had weathered judgment without growing bitter. Her story became more than inspiration, it became instruction. A reminder that you can start again, even after the world decides you shouldn't. And always, quietly but consistently, Bruce Willis remained part of that journey. As he faced his own health struggles, the bond between him and Demi only deepened. Public appearances showed warmth, authenticity, and mutual admiration. They weren't rewriting the past, they were honoring it. Raising their daughters with dignity, showing the world that love doesn't end just because romance does. Their continued friendship spoke volumes. In an industry often fueled by drama and severed ties, theirs was a story of loyalty, healing, and mutual respect. It reminded audiences that some connections transcend career and ego. That sometimes, the most powerful support is the kind that comes without expectation or spotlight. For Demi, Bruce had not only stood beside her when others walked away, he had helped her believe again, in herself, in her worth, in the possibility of new chapters. And that belief had carried her farther than any fame ever could. Today, Moore stands not just as an actress, but as a voice. For every woman told she's too old, too different, too much, for every artist forced to fit into shrinking molds, her story, once used as cautionary tale, now shines as proof that reinvention is not only possible, it's powerful. She continues to speak, to act, to mentor. But more importantly, she continues to live on her own terms. In her 50s, 60s, and beyond, she is determined to stay visible, valuable, and vibrant. Not for validation, but for truth. Because relevance, she learned, isn't granted, it's claimed. Her legacy now stretches beyond the films that made her famous. It lives in the doors she's reopened for others, in the scripts rewritten to include older women as complex protagonists. In the belief, now slowly spreading through Hollywood, that talent doesn't expire, the impact is still unfolding. Younger actresses cite her as a source of strength. Journalists cover her projects with nuance, not gossip. Directors write roles with her in mind, not as a risk, but as a statement. The change is far from complete, but it has begun, and Demi Moore helped start it. So if her career was once seen as a rise and fall, it now reads differently, as a long, winding evolution, one marked by boldness, bruises, and an unshakable will to endure. If this journey moved you, if it reminded you of your own resilience or challenged the way you see age, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that reveal, uplift, and confront. Every chapter has something to teach us. And now, click the next video on your screen to continue exploring the powerful lives behind the headlines. Because these stories, they're just getting started.